Season 1, Episode 13 of the Every Plant Story podcast, the podcast where we share all kinds of plant stories from here in the life of us at Gabriella Plants and all around our plant community. My name's Shane Malloy, and I'm the owner and president of Gabriella Plants, and I'm your host for this podcast, along with my co-host for today, which will be Brett, our head grower at our original location, and really runs the whole growing side of leading those teams in both locations now. Brett, welcome to the podcast. But
hey guys,
now we have two greenhouses technically that you're helping kind of plan strategy for. How's that been going?
Very exciting.
Yeah.
We have evaporative cooling pads. I'm sure we've talked about in Brooks before, so it just lets us grow a wider variety of things in a better condition than we've ever been able to do before, which is very exciting.
Yeah, those begonias over there, we've been growing, do you know how many? It was 2,800 or something like that?
Yep, it's 21 varieties for a total of 2,800 pots out there right now.
That's crazy. Yeah, so we got all those planted in the last 2 weeks at the Brooks greenhouses, and Brett mentioned the evaporative cooling, but holy moly, that thing works. You know, I was kind of looking at it when we first built that greenhouse and the number of fans and the volume of air they moved, and I was like, this seems like slightly overkill. And definitely on the past week we've had a lot of overcast, and yeah, I've had to go down to just using one of the 3 fan sets because it was like cooling it all the way. It was working too good, honestly. It was cooling it down to like 76, and I got to thinking about it, and I was like, I probably should have checked with you, but I was like, I'm pretty sure they want, like, you know, not the 90s, but like warmer the better to some extent, right? Sure. As long as the humidity's up.
Yeah,
so,
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, but the point isn't to chill them.
Right.
But yeah, the Brooks greenhouse has been a lot of fun. It's been fun having that so close to my backyard, about 150 feet from my back door. So being able to go out there every night and get busy planting and
crank those numbers.
Yeah, exactly. We got to be always growing more. I'll do my part. Well, awesome. Well, the other cool thing, today's show, we just kind of have some different reflections on kind of the halfway point of the year and some of the other things that are coming in the second half of the year, and kind of see where the show takes us. If you ever have any questions you want us to address on the podcast, you can also email that to us at feedback@everyplantstory.com, and we'd be happy to take a look at that and try to incorporate that into a show, as we will with a customer email towards the end of the show today as well. But first, Brett, let's go ahead and just dive into what have you learned from the first half of the year. Obviously, now we're getting into summer. It's hot. Except for the last week, it's been a little bit nicer with the afternoon storms rolling through. But what have you learned? What's your number one takeaway? What makes you most excited about what's happened so far? And then we'll get into what's going on in the future.
Well, first I'd like to say, separate from the plants that we actually have growing in the greenhouse and all of the progress that we have made on that end of it, there really has been so much growth and just amazing camaraderie in the team. I mean, all of the employees of the team at Gabriella Plants, but specifically at the growing location, we've just become, even closer, and it's just amazing how well we work together, and we're able to accomplish so much, even though it's really not that many of us.
Yeah, no, you've done a great job growing that team. It's also been cool to see how I think it was going to be a challenge to any company that would go into a multi-location type of an operation. But even in the last 2 weeks since the last podcast, I've seen a tremendous amount of growth too in the different teams kind of realizing and kind of coming back to and being reminded of the fact that although you have your specific, responsibilities and role, we all have our part to do with making a customer happy at the end of it.
Absolutely.
So, it's been really cool to see that. And Sam, who hasn't been able to be on the podcast for a little while, but Sam has been doing a great job too, running that original location. And it's been cool to see that entire team grow. Another thing, we don't have to go into too many details, but
Go ahead.
When you joined the team, you kind of took the helm of applying pesticides and doing pest control. And as you know now, doing a full, we're just under an acre. I redid the math, by the way, because I was curious if you added Brooks, would we cross an acre of total square footage?
Okay.
And we are 816 square feet short of an acre with Brooks.
Good
so about 1,000 or so square feet. Yeah, so it's been really cool to see when you have that much space. Obviously, one person is not going to be able to keep up with it as much, especially when some pests, if you're dealing with a more a good enough infestation, I guess.
Right.
It really requires more and more. Most of the time we're able to use pesticides and quite honestly use several lower strength pesticides from time to time compared to some of the more risky things that are out there. When you're kind of in maintenance mode, which is a lot easier to do in the wintertime,
Sure.
pests slow down. Then obviously as the summer ramps up, you have kind of two things happening. One, pests become more active in general,
Right.
they're out and about. And then number two, it's 100 degrees inside the greenhouse. So physically, the physical toll of being able to spray the entire greenhouse really limits you to how often you can do it and everything else because, it's a physically exerting, when you're in all that PPE, it's a physically exerting.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir, honey. Yes, when I came in, I came into the job knowing that as head grower, I wanted to make sure that we were on track with pest management. And so I did go ahead and get certified through Florida State with my commercial pesticide applicator license. And I was kind of spearheading the spraying for the first 6 months. But shout out to our greenhouse team leader, Hunter, and our greenhouse team member Micah, who both just recently passed their Florida State certification as well. I started training them this week, and so in the upcoming weeks, there will be 3 of us doing the spraying, which is good because not only will I get a day off, but we're going to be able, with more manpower, spray more often and start using a routine and a regimen that hopefully will get us ahead of any pest problems we see, so that as we come to this time next year, we know how best to, fight off anything before it even happens.
Oh yeah. And and I like that we're just even bringing up the topic of pests too, because I think there's a large misconception that when you're a professional grower or, we just don't deal with those problems. And the reality is we deal with them as much as anyone else,
Absolutely.
And you learn from the mistakes you make. And I think the other side of the thing that's been really cool to see, even just in the last really week, is as we've been using our internal GP app is what we call it. It's an app for employees in our team to use, and it tracks all the every plant story stakes and other things, all the inventory in our greenhouses and stuff. But one of the major things about pests, whether you're a consumer or a professional grower, is simply identifying it,
right?
Finding where it is and finding it early enough before it turns into a bigger problem. We have, what was the last count? Something like 70,000 plants inside the greenhouse. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's bound to be a few with something going on, a disease or a pest. It's really important to, just like any other health condition or anything else,
right.
If you catch it early enough, you got way more options to deal with it. So it's been cool to see you investing some of your time into teaching the team, even down to the shipping team, more about how to identify the pests and stuff, because I think both of us are on the same page that is equally as important as who's spraying and what chemical is getting used or whatever, is simply being able to have enough eyes and a system like GP app in the future where you can identify this section of the bench, this crop. That's where it's starting. We need to address that.
That's absolutely correct. We are on the same page. And I mean, you're right. I can be out there and the greenhouse team can be out there and we're spraying and we're, noticing and trying to find things on the first line of defense to spot things before they get out. But sometimes things will still get pulled, into inventory to then go to shipping. And we have so many roadblocks set up that there are so many people that touch the customer's plants before it goes out, that if we keep everyone on the team trained with, a knowledgeable eye of what they're looking for, we can potentially stop anything, any pest issues from arriving to the customer, before they even get there.
And we do a great job at that. I mean, we don't have any rampant problems with what goes out, but as a grower, you do have to, but we do that, and we have a whole Slack channel within the team of what area, we'll just, if we saw a pest on a bench, we kind of just make the mental note of okay,
exactly.
Well, 10 days until we're going to try to remove anything from this bench again. Let's get this under control.
It's the open communication. And yeah, I think it is important for the customer to realize that we aren't perfect. And you do have to realize that when we have 70,000 plants, like you mentioned, there are going to be pests, and it is something that we're working with. It is a commercial greenhouse. It's not a completely sterile, environment.
Yeah,
so.
It's not concrete floors or, anything.
Right.
There's enough entry points. And that's the other thing that with the original location being passive, you just have so many. The only way you keep it relatively cool, and by relatively cool, I mean about 5 degrees hotter than what it is outside, is by having all the side curtains open and the top vents open. And it is pretty windy in Florida, so you can get a good anything can come from anywhere, I guess. But it is important that customers know that we really care about that thing. And if they were to ever have that type of problem, we want to take care of it. Those mistakes happen at 1% on orders or less.
Right.
But when they do happen, that's why we're here. We're growers. We can take a look at the photo, say, hey, totally our bad. We'll take care of refunding this or replacing it for you. We do that every week to take care of our customers, not only because of pests. Pests are probably the least thing that gets reported, but shipping is the same kind of story. When you ship several thousands of plants a week, you're going to have some that a mailman was either like really trying to recreate the Heisman moment or was a little disgruntled, one or the other. And we can't possibly know that when we put them into the pallet and send them on their way from our location. So
no, and our customer care team is just as important. I told Miriam last week she deserves an award because, our customers are awesome, but you have to be able to deal with anything that anyone throws at you.
Yeah.
And she does a great job.
Yeah, it can really be the full spectrum of like, hey, I just have this question that has nothing to do with Gabriella Plants to the full other end of the spectrum too. But speaking of which, a little bit of housekeeping. Miriam's out the beginning of this week, so I've been doing more customer care, and I will also be out towards the end of this week. So I just want to throw that in here. We're recording this podcast on Tuesday, June 29th, most likely on Thursday or Friday, which I believe is the 1st or the 2nd. I will be in Denver, Colorado, and we'll be trying to organize on the Instagram a meetup for those of you, because it looks like there's at least like 3 or 4 dozen people who want to try to do a meetup. So watch the Gabriella Plants Instagram at Gabriella Plants Online on the stories to kind of figure out where I'm going to be, and I'll try to
Gabriella Plants goes to the West Coast.
I know, right? I was thinking today, I was like, I got to make sure I leave room in my bag to like bring stickers and other things.
I was just about to say, you better bring stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, we got some cool new Rio tank tops, so
yes,
I may have to.
I got one this weekend. It's very nice.
It's a nice tank top.
Oh yeah.
Right? Anyway, moving on, but it's been a crazy first half of the year for sure at the growing location. And I feel like, as we said before, since it is your first year, operating with us,
right?
It's so cool to see the seasons change, because each season comes with a new set of challenges, and we try to be transparent about the challenges, and we want to help other growers.
Absolutely. I think it's awesome what we're doing and being so open with the customers. From the very beginning, when you started the company, it was very much you're learning as you go, and we're here to let the people know how we're doing what we're doing, and what we're doing, and some things we're doing are amazing and we take in stride, and some things just don't go off as well, but we learn from it and we keep going. And that's the wonderful thing about this company, is we're still learning, and we're here to share our story with everyone.
Yeah, and we're here to learn with our customers too. Some of the best ideas from time to time have come from a customer going, I like that idea, but what if you also added this, or something else? And it's always been cool to have that direct relationship with our customers. But so that's kind of a recap for the first half of the year. Brett, what do you think, what can people expect in the second half of the year? What are you looking forward to most?
Well, I think from just a standpoint of the growing location, in the past 6 months from when I started, we weren't using any portion of the back 2 greenhouses that we had on property. That now we have developed probably 80% of those greenhouses to grow even more plants. We're revamping what was originally called the Philly House, which had a lot of the rare or uncommon plants that now have been moved to Brooks. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the original building, correct?
It was the second most original. The most original building was made of entirely fiberglass and blew apart in 2004 during Hurricane Charlie.
Okay.
I literally watched the stereotypical movie scenario.
I'm thinking
where
Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, or like any good Twister movie,
Okay.
like where the tornado's like a half mile away, but then like, you know, the camera shot goes to like the backyard like little hut or whatever, and you just see like the metal just pull away from the
Wild.
side, like stereotypical hurricane footage
Sure.
of like full roof just like kind of lifting up and going somewhere. I just watched that happen in my backyard.
So this is the oldest still standing
Correct,
structure.
yeah,
Okay. So so now that a lot of those plants have been moved to Brooks, we're revamping that area, as well as, you know, reworking and adding bench space to the already existing greenhouses at OG. So just seeing our capacity and our potential to grow even more plants literally just by having more space is also really exciting going forward into the second half of the year.
Yeah. Another thing that I was talking about with you before we get started on the podcast today was we have a Facebook behind the scenes group for Gabriella Plants, obviously. And in there's some announcements and I was sharing with you, Brett, that I've kind of left some of the pinned announcements in there for several years at this point, because a lot of those really early posts, kind of just like what you were just saying, was the first post that said, hey, so we're trying this new way to ship a plant this way. Let us know if these like stakes in each one works. You know, you can kind of see the progression of each step as we grew as a company. And every once in a while, customers that will go on a deep dive will randomly like these old posts. So I see the notification of like somebody else
awesome.
liked this post from 2018 or whatever. And the one that I was showing you earlier, which like was just mind blowing, because you've spent a ton of time in the past month working with our dev team and Chuck specifically to make sure that all of our plant names are botanically accurate. And
Correct.
we're kind of resetting how our data, we won't get lost in the technicals. I shouldn't be qualified to talk about it anyways. The man who is in the other room. But that we're changing the way that the data works inside the database to accommodate more things, like being able to track where cuttings came from and how we step up a plant, things like that weren't necessarily initially in the first beta of the Every Plant Story State kind of system. So in that whole thing, you've been working on refining the botanically accurate species or cultivar names for all the plants we grow. So not even counting the difference between a 3-inch neon and a 4-inch neon, like just Pothos neon is, you know, 1.
Right.
And last night, somebody liked this post that I had made in September of 2019, and I wrote down the numbers. According to that post, the number of different species we had sold wholesale previous to knowing Gabriella Plants and our customers online was 14 different species in 2018.
So cool. It's just so cool.
I love that giggle. That's gonna be the beginning intro to the show. I'm just gonna take in 2018 we only grew 14 and then just let your giggle carry on. But then in 2019 we grew 45.
Okay.
And in 2020, based on another note, wasn't in the post, but based on a note in my own notes, we were at somewhere around 208 last year.
Okay.
How many?
That's wild.
Right?
That's so
Just
wild.
208. And it went from 14 to 208 in 2 years.
And so then, as of earlier today, I did the count, and I have spent countless hours, and I have correctly assigned scientific botanical names to 572 different plants.
That's awesome.
So those are plants that we grow. Those are plants that we've bought in to then sell to our customers. Those are plants that we may not have ready to sell for another 6 months to a year. But
It may
those
not
are
even
plants
be on
that
the
are in
website
work.
yet, but that we're working on ourselves.
Right, and that 572 number I was also thinking about doesn't include some plants that have such limited numbers or are so way down in the production that we haven't even put into the app yet.
Right.
So, I mean, that number is more than 572.
Because when I often tell one of my favorite things, I think you can relate to this too. I think it's like just a grower thing.
Okay.
But like the most rewarding propagation you can possibly do is when you literally specifically only have one of something.
Yes.
And you can get from 1 to 2. And then the same amount of like adrenaline rush and
Yes.
joy comes from the 2 to 4. And then it kind of, obviously falls off. There's always joy in planting every batch, but taking 1 to 2 is always, like, to me at least, a huge milestone.
Yes.
And the thing that people need to realize is sometimes, even as growers, connected with other growers and stuff, we can only get our hands on maybe 1 or 2 cuttings of something. And the amount of time, just sheer time it takes to get from the 1 or 2 to, say, a dozen,
right,
can be a full year.
Oh, yeah.
And in that time, we may not track it in our systems just to kind of keep the clutter away, because it takes so long to get from that 1 to 12. And then obviously as you get above a dozen, now you can start, just like your whole 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 16,
right.
The whole exponent
well, and
thing.
We've talked about this in past episodes. When one of the first episodes I did was on, what in production means. But just because we started with 1 and we got to 12 doesn't mean we want to sell 10 of them just to sell them, because then we're back to 2. Like, the goal is we need to keep exponentially multiplying those numbers until I have half a bench that if I release 300, I'm confident that we didn't just sell out our stock and we're back to square one.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to pull up something on the Instagram. I recently did an Instagram Q&A over the weekend. I don't know if you were able to see it. I got to get you to do one of those soon. Okay. But I always love getting to do them.
As the grower.
Yeah, it's always fun. And I think it's a unique perspective as me as a business owner too, because I always get a few people questioning. Obviously, people have the plant care questions, the pest questions, the availability questions of when we're going to have something next and things like that. Another thing that often, or nearly every time I've ever done one of these things, this is the 15th one I think I've done, or 16th since the beginning. And one of the most reoccurring questions is, what should I be excited for most? What's the, what
up and coming?
Yeah. Or is this is the exact question I answered earlier in the week, but what's the most exciting plant you have coming? So I pose that to you, Brett.
Okay.
By the way, for a record, I said I've been working hard to increase our capacity to grow a lot more of the
Monstera pinnata partita.
Yeah. Yes. I didn't want to say it wrong. I didn't want to say it wrong specifically in front of you.
He's showing me a photo. No, I appreciate that.
Hey, at least I got the spelling right.
Yes, you did. Well, to answer that with one plant is difficult.
That's what I'm saying. Or the other one is always like, what's your favorite thing growing in the greenhouse right now? And I'm like, well, I'm kind of like, I don't like to pick favorite children. You know what I mean? Like, they're all fun.
All right, let's give the people what they want. Let's give them a couple things. So something that was new to me, going back to what I've learned in these 6 months being here. Previously, I was a plant broker, and as a plant broker, when you buy off a grower's availability, typically you can buy what they have ready right then. They don't want to sell anything in advance. They don't really want to let the plant go until it is ready to ship. Being in the growing business, I'd say that probably 80% of the plants that we grow come from tissue culture. And so the way that the tissue culture companies work is completely different than wholesale plant growers, as in they require a pre-book sometimes a year to 2 years in advance. And so coming into this, there were some outstanding pre-books left for me, but I've kind of been able to take the reins of this, and I've already started pre-booking plants for 2022 that we're going to be able to grow and have down the line. That some things also aren't available right now, but these are things that we have secured that will be down the road for, either next 6 months or beginning of 2022. And some of those plants that I'm pretty excited about are different jewel orchids. We currently have Ludicea discolor growing in the greenhouse. We did also just get in our first batch of Ludicea discolor variety nigricans, which is a black version of it.
What?
Yes. Very, very pretty. So they're small now, but they will be growing. We're going to offer these in 3-inch size pots. So cute, perfect for a terrarium or whatever you want to do with them. We're also going to be getting Micodes petola, which is the golden jewel orchid, as well as Ludicea discolor variety alba, which it looks like a Ludicea discolor, but it's green. So it's pretty cool. We'll have those 4 different varieties of jewel orchids, which is something that's a plant that's new and popular on the scene. I also think they're pretty easy to care for and they're interesting. And I mean, I know I'm biased, but I love orchids. So being able to sell a customer an orchid is like awesome.
Yeah. And it's also one of those plants that works really well as like a cute little plant. I don't know how else to say that, but like, you know, there's different, obviously a ponytail palm is not the best thing to classify as like a small plant, right?
Yes.
But it's definitely one of the cuter plants that also maintains that smaller leaf shape and is like that perfect on the corner of your desk or bathroom windowsill type thing.
Absolutely. And I think we cater to a wide variety of customers, as in there are many different applications for the plants that we sell. Some customers want a plant for their kitchen table or their windowsill, but some customers also are a next step up and they have terrariums or vivariums that they're working on that may be bioactive or may have animals like a reptile or amphibian or something in them. And we also sell plants that are better suited for that type of growing. So to be able to offer just a wider range of plants, like you're saying, these stay really small, that can be used in these types of situations. And we're not just selling a giant ficus that a customer wouldn't be able to put in a small terrarium. It's cool to be able to have the variety.
Yeah, no, and that actually leads me into another question. I'll ask you this. This is from the Instagram Q&A too. Now, this is one I answered, but you kind of already answered it with the TC is, you know, a large extent of it. But I don't know what percent, I can't recall what percent you said, but the other thing that's interesting about TC is how much it is what we rely on more in the colder months. Right. And as we get into summer and the things that are really popular that we do grow from cuttings, obviously in the wintertime, we can be very limited. We can't make a cutting grow faster. So we kind of got to wait on the ball game there. But in summertime, we tend to, you know, have more cuttings available too, which lets us kind of be mindful through the early part of spring of what's been working for customers, what customers can't get enough of. And, you know, we're able to really tailor what we grow. But one of the questions that we got was, if you're always growing more, but when do you decide to stop restocking or stop growing a specific variety? And, you know, I kind of took that question as it could be like, is there a minimum number that have to sell in order for it to be, you know, viable to grow? But the way that I answered it was just that there's, especially with the things we grow from cuttings, TC is TC. What we get is, you know, how you pre-book it and also the availability of other growers, or even if we're buying in cuttings or anything that we're having to source is obviously reliant on the source.
Right.
But anything that is self-contained, at least how I've always operated the greenhouses, we rather have, you know, enough cuttings of all those species on hand and decide to not really be actively producing them for sale, but at least maintaining mothers of certain plants or maintaining very minimum numbers of maybe 30 or 60 a month, something like that. Because given how small we are, the economics of scale, obviously when things are popular, we want to grow as much of it, but we're not big enough to have an entire greenhouse, you know, an entire acre of begonias, an entire acre of ferns, an entire acre of everything else. And we have to be really kind of specific about how we use our space and which ones we do keep on hand. But how would you answer the question of when do we stop?
I think I would agree with how you answered that. It is very much constantly fluctuating. There is no real set rule that I'm going to be able to give the customers, other than it is a supply and demand type market. If we know that Prince of Orange are still really, really hot, then obviously I'm going to keep getting in 6, 7, 8 trays of Prince of Orange every 6 weeks. Whereas if it's something like a Pothos Neon and we once had a full bench and they're just not selling as quick and we have those mother baskets that are getting really long, we'll let that get down to half a bench. And maybe that next time we trim those mother baskets, we just throw those cuttings away and we don't stick them in pots because we don't need another crop at that time. I think it is just very dependent on also how much we have of the stock. So something that they're doing this week is we probably have 6 different crops on rotation right now of 4-inch Ficus triangularis variegata. So 6 different crops that are ready to sell right now. Go online and get them. They're so beautiful. Please buy these plants. But we also have an entire bench of 8-inch mother Ficus triangularis variegata that are so huge that they're just not even getting watered efficiently anymore because they're so big. So we're going through this week and we're just going to give them a hard chop back. And unfortunately, we're just going to throw those cuttings away because we don't need any more crops right now.
Right. And we do have to work with limited bench space, which I think is something,
Right.
To most plant enthusiasts, like, you're going to throw something away? I'll show up, and I'm sure there'll be somebody
Right.
offering
I was already thinking that as soon as I said this, I can imagine the emails we're going to get. I will take them.
Where's your
But
compost
it's
pile? I'll show up.
It's a business decision, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's a decision of, just having a limited amount of resources. We are big in the sense that we've been able to accomplish some big projects and some big goals and definitely serve our customers super well. But we're also, like I mentioned earlier, under an acre, which for perspective, the single company that's the largest plant grower on the East Coast, we're 1/5200th. I don't know if that's how you would say it,
Sure.
but 5,200th of the growing space, the number, the amount of acres of
Right.
greenhouses. So we're super small potatoes.
Well, and then, even just looking at the numbers, if we grew 200 different types of plants last year and now we grow 572, other than adding brooks, the amount of space that we have to grow those plants is the same amount of space. So,
Other than maybe
that
the
goes
one
with-
or two greenhouses you've added benches in the back.
right,
but yeah.
which is, minuscule in the grand scheme of things.
Correct.
That you have to realize that if the greenhouses were full with 200 plants and now they're still full with 500 plants, that we had to cut numbers down on some things to make room for other things.
And I think that that's always been part of, though, I think we're right where we want to be.
Oh, absolutely.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because one of the things that smaller growers can do, and it's honestly what my dad always did wholesale too, was, although it was only 14 at the time, but when he grew pothos and philodendron and like the heart-shaped ones, he grew every different kind he could. Obviously, was working on Rio and Gabby too on his side time, specifically because there were a lot of mom and pop stores that even the shop wouldn't sell more than 5 of any single variety, 4 jades, 3 neons. So my dad kind of fit this weird niche where he could make these assorted trays of 30 plants with like just 4 of this and 5 of this. And, that's one of the things we've kind of carried forward, honestly, into how we run the greenhouses now, is we do have a little bit of everything. And the cool thing is, I know there's customers who are, essentially just waiting until we restock something in the super uncommon or rare category. But this year, way more than last year, there's been probably at least 60 items on the website, the vast majority of the year.
Outside of 8 p.m. on Wednesday, there's still plants in stock.
Right. And we use that to gauge the interest on whether we do plant more neons or we throw those cuttings away or something else like that.
I will say that's a perfect example for, I thought Echeveria were going to be super hot. I thought people were going to love succulents. We, expanded our succulent selection, and you people are just not buying the Echeveria like I was thinking. So, which is fine if,
It also is like a totally different plant than anything we've ever offered to a customer too.
Sure.
What makes you like them the most?
I like succulents. Highlight, put it on your windowsill. If it's an Echeveria, it's going to stay small somewhat, so you're not looking at a plant that in 6 months is going to need like 2 different repots. Also, they're drought tolerant. I'm sure we have plenty of customers that, as long as you don't overwater it, like, it's fine, it's pretty, it's cute, like, it'll just live there.
And they will put out like those little bloom spikes too, and those are beautiful when they.
And we have maybe 4 or 5 different, I'm air quoting, succulent, which is either like Echeveria or Haworthia varieties right now. Those 5 or 6 or 8 varieties that we sell right now, I hand selected to grow out of the 20 that were out there for us to choose. So, I was picking ones that I guess was also biased, that were my favorite, that I thought were the most interesting, trying to pass that along. And so I think it just comes with, now we know.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No. And we still did sell a decent amount of them too.
It's also possible that 2 years from now, we're going to get a bunch of emails saying, I need succulents. And then we'll just ramp numbers back up at that time. Who knows how the houseplant market is going to go.
Yeah, I think that's one of the questions. We do get it in the Instagram from time to time. It's like, what's the big new thing in the market? And I'm like, beats me, man. Like I love growing plants. We love obviously, reacting to what our customers want more of and stuff like that, but we're not fortune tellers either. And
Sure.
and for that matter, growers in general aren't.
And I mean,
that's the reason why things become rare is because if it becomes popular and every grower had 6 of them.
Well, and we're already on the cusp of being trendsetters, essentially. And we have our fingers on the pulse of the houseplant market considerably more than probably 99% of the other growers in general foliage production do. Because you and I of being young blood and being, infused in this plant community, we kind of know what's hot and we know that there's money and desire in these things that people want. But a lot of the growers that are out there that have been growing plants for 30, 40 years, they're very much, I don't want to say stuck in their ways, but they're comfortable in what they grow. And they're also not looking to risk their entire business by changing what they grow up completely.
Mm-hmm. And you have the delay in kind of how information gets there too, because
Absolutely.
if you go into Brett's garden center, not here at Gabriella, but a make-believe garden center, and you say, hey, I'm looking for pink princess. That person who owns the shop doesn't grow it.
Right.
And they may not even technically be in contact. What you used to do is that shop owner would contact somebody like you who's a broker, not a grower either.
Right.
The number of end customers who ran a shop and actually talked to the head grower of the person running the growing operation before 2016 to 2020 when things started to pick up on the digital end. And then obviously I don't know about you, I've seen a huge explosion in more people following kind of what we did as far as if they fall into this very small operation category to start serving customers directly. But a lot of those shop owners simply don't have contact directly with a grower. So you're kind of relying on the broker passing that information along or asking often enough. I mean, Brett, you would call me every, twice a week or whatever and say, you got any more pink princess or whatever. Right. And so eventually as a grower, you pick up on the hint of like, I answer more calls asking about pink princess than any other plant we grow. I should probably grow as much of that as I can. But short of that, there isn't always a direct connection to what a customer wants.
And
to
these
the
are most of these
it.
growers that are still using fax anyway. So
correct. Yeah.
And we are fortunate enough also that, like we're mentioning, with being able to buy plants that we can then, propagate it or get rare cuttings in that we can take 1 to 20 to 300. A lot of these growers don't necessarily have the resources to get in these other plants. They are kind of reliant on only what the tissue culture companies are able to provide them. And so then there's also a delay in, let's say, we'll use pink princess again. Let's say the grower finally does understand, hey, people have been asking like crazy for pink princess. And they then somehow pass it along to the tissue culture company. That's looking at 2 to 3 years for the tissue culture company to be able to get that into production to then offer.
Which is what you saw.
Right.
I mean, when I first started the Etsy page was in September or late August of 2018. And you started to see TC Pink Princess show up in the middle to end of 2020. I mean, the pre-batches were kind of earlier last spring, but they really ramped into full production towards the end of last year. And that is essentially 2 full years from the peak of the demand and the asking. So it is crazy to see how those things go. And one of the things when a plant, even like Pink Princess, which has been by and large scaled to a certain extent, you do have the people who, there are going to be the plants that are so hard to grow that regardless of whether it's TC doing their part to help ramp production, it's more growers even importing from overseas to get a head start on how many they can start with. If it's a slow grower and it's only going to produce 3 leaves in a year, I mean, that just makes it that much harder too. So it's one thing to have kind of the source ramp up, whether it's cuttings from somebody else,
Sure.
dividing and multiplying.
But the actual viability of being able to commercially produce a crop. I think
get it to fully grown size. You may even be able to get the tiny little TC, a pink princess, at 2 years, but that doesn't mean you have a 6-inch one that's 2 feet tall.
I think a good example of this was, 2 or 3 years ago, people started freaking out over variegated Ficus lorata, and everyone wanted variegated Ficus lorata, but they are so incredibly hard to grow and keep clean that I don't know of a single grower in the United States that is mass producing variegated Ficus lorata because it's just not feasible.
Yeah, it's hard. It's too hard.
And so even though there is a demand for it, it's just, it's not economical.
Or it may be an Anthurium where you kind of have to wait on the hybridizing process, which brings me to...
Yay!
Yes, one of the things Brett has been teaching me a lot of, if you've been following my social media, is he crossed... Do you remember what 2 Anthuriums he crossed?
It was an Anthurium crystallinum X magnificum with a crystallinum X magnificum. So crystal mag squared, let's call it that.
All right, crystal mag squared.
Yeah.
That almost sounds like a fertilizer brand or something. But you kind of showed me, obviously you did the initial hybridizing.
Right, of taking the pollen and, pollinating the female floral parts of the one spathe and spadix, and then getting it to be pollinated. And then it was probably 2 months that inflorescence sat there and developed into infructescence, and that those berries then started to develop, and within the past week some of those berries have started to be ripe. And so then
yeah. So speaking of ripe berries, I'd say probably 70% of once it is pollinated in that long kind of period where it's developing each berry, it kind of starts to create, I'm not using a botanical term, but like a scale,
sure,
like a little raised bump where there will be a seed that kind of pops out eventually, or so I've learned from Brett this week.
Yes.
We're all learning together. I love it. But in each day, kind of as they become mature or ready to be harvested, they'll kind of pop out. So probably 70% of those little bumps have now popped out.
Awesome.
I think I counted last night. There's 37 seedlings that I've planted so far.
And so you were getting consistently 2 seeds per berry?
No.
Okay.
No, it was probably about 40% had 2.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I may have harvested a few a little too small because a couple of them, it's kind of weird because I'm making up the number, but let's just say there's 200 slots on the bloom there.
Sure.
Maybe half of that had pollinated,
right? Well, because
like that.
Right, because it wasn't a perfect pollination. Not every single flower got pollinated. So basically, on the inflorescence, if every one of them had been pollinated, it would look like a perfect corn on the cob type thing. But because not everything was pollinated, it is very irregular or sporadic.
Yeah, very shotgun spread as far as which ones. So some of the ones where the berries, some of the ones that were successful and produced berries just happened to be just right up next to each other. And I think I accidentally, trying to get some of the bigger ones off, got some of them off a little bit too soon.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But the rest of the process, as you have explained it, is then I take that. The rest of the process, as you have explained it, is I take those berries, we take the skin off, kind of peel that and get just the seed, and then make sure that the extra enzymes and things that are around the seed get kind of worn off.
Yes.
And then eventually plant them not submerged under soil, but kind of resting in a pocket of soil with some extra sphagnum on top to keep it moist.
Yes, so it's going to create that basically microclimate around the seed so that it can stay humid and develop. So it's going to develop the roots first, which are going to then go down into the soil that the seeds were laid on top of. And once it develops a nice taproot, it then will push out its cotyledon leaf, and then its first true leaves will follow. And so you planted those in 72 cell trays that are in a humidity dome. So the Anthurium seeds will germinate pretty quickly. So probably within the next week or two, you'll start to see sproutlings, and then we'll get a better idea.
Yeah, I'm really curious. What do you think is going to be the success? I mean, you didn't see me plant them, but what do you think the success rate will be on some of those?
I mean, I'm pretty confident if you were able to, harvest the seeds and remove the extra berry pulp and clean them off and plant them the way we, worked out. I think we're going to see upwards of 90% success rate.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's just now, I mean, getting them to germinate is just one of the many beginning steps. We then obviously have to keep it alive and get it to a point where it's now rooted in that cell tray that then you can pop out and put into a larger pot. And I mean, this is something that we're looking on probably this time 2022 will be
okay. That was
to.
My next question was, maybe I successfully did step 1, but how long do you think that will be until it's, say, a 4-inch size?
I think a year.
A year?
Before it's something that we can offer the customer, and the baby plants will have traits that resemble the parents, I'd say about a year.
That's cool. That's so cool. It's also such a long, that's one of the cool things about being a grower is that there's projects that test your patience, and it's a simultaneous, everything happens so fast that you can't keep up with it because there is so much happening every day. And then there's also things like these seedlings and other things where a watch pot never boils. You could sit there and just drive yourself absolutely crazy, wondering if you did it wrong. So it's always fun to see those two different perspectives. Well, I wanted to bring up, as we kind of close up today's podcast, I want to bring a really weird. So I mentioned if you have any questions for the podcast, you can email feedback at everyplantstory.com. We got this one email this past maybe about a week ago or so. Pulling it up here from Annie, and we'll post the photo on the story or something.
So they know what we're talking about.
Yeah, at the Every Plant. Go on Instagram at Every Plant Story, and when this podcast is out, we'll post this photo. But Brett kind of described what the photo is here, and she basically sends this picture of a Sanzavaria that's out of a pot. I'll let Brett explain what's going on with the Sanzavaria. But her basic question is, I've never seen this before. When she went to repot this particular Sanzavaria, it's not from us, from somebody else. And she was like, is what I'm looking at a help or a hurt? So,
all right,
Brett, you want to kind of...
Yes, let me paint the picture for our viewers. So essentially, there are a bunch of Sanzavaria tip cuttings in a pot that are densely bunched together and being held together by this intricate piece of foam material.
It almost looks like when you go to a florist and they have those blocks where you kind of, not quite that thick, but it's that kind of foam looking material.
So what we're looking at, it's a Sanzavaria Fernwood Mikado. So Mikado, which are sold as Mikado tips, are actually just a Sanzavaria Fernwood tip that the grower has cut the tips of and placed into this pot. It gives it a different kind of tighter, clumping, upright look, as opposed to the standard Fernwood is very up and out. So they're trying to market the plant as something new in a way that Fernwood couldn't previously be sold. And because this pot probably has 18 to 20 of these Mikado tips in the pot, they were stuck as they were planted through this piece of foam, so then they could maintain their structural integrity as they were shipped out and received with the customer. But as our customer who sent this photo shows in the picture, after she unpotted it, there are, the rhizomes of the new snake plants starting to grow through and stick through the foam. And so she's asking, is it detrimental? Is it going to harm the plant? Should I remove it?
Yeah, should I take the foam away?
But no, I think it's really up to you, the customer. Realize that the plant has grown through that foam so intricately that you may risk damaging it by removing it. If you are able to remove it without damaging the plant, it may lose its shape and its overall appearance in the pot. Also, it's not going to do anything negative to the plant. I mean, foam is abiotic, so it's not going to necessarily house any diseases or anything. And this type of like black foam material, it's not really going to hold any extra water that I'd be worried about it rotting the plant. So, I mean, honestly, in this instance, because the plant is so far grown through it, I'd say almost just leave it.
Yeah. I mean, it is unique though. I don't think I've seen that. You know, we sell one of the Sanzavaria that have the braid
Yes.
to it, but that is kind of all stuff that happens above the soil line. As it grows, you know, the growers will kind of twist it and tie it with a ribbon or something. This was obviously hanging beneath the soil line.
Right.
Yeah, that was my first impression too. And what I initially responded to her too was just like, well, my number one rule with a plant is if it's happy, this plant in the photo, as the customers will see when they, listeners will see on the Instagram, like it's happy.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's a happy
growing.
plant.
It's doing its thing.
My rule number one always is if it's happy, don't make yourself a problem. It's obviously, you know, if you need to repot it, sure, but don't mess with something if it's not broken, I guess.
Absolutely.
So anyhow, yeah, that Annie, thanks for sharing that photo with us, because I'd never seen something like that before.
This is, I mean, you've said it a couple times, but I'm all for it. Like, please, if you have questions, send us questions. I'd love to answer that. We can even let's think about doing like a live Q&A or something, an Instagram live. That would be awesome.
Did you see this is really specific. Did you see the camera test we did on Twitch the other day?
No, tell me.
Yeah, I finally have a way to do a wireless DSLR, like Zach's big camera.
Nice.
Over the Ethernet that's in my backyard from the greenhouse to my studio, and then
So cool.
broadcast it live. So we can literally have me answering questions in my office and then go, okay, here's Brett, and go to you like it's a news crew.
So cool.
Like in the greenhouse. Like I finally figured out how to do that, which has been my lifelong goal, is to be able to like walk around and do a high quality live stream off like a really nice camera that's better than how your phone compresses things and stuff. So maybe soon.
Woo!
Yeah, we're getting real close on that. I had one other question that somebody posted in here, and I didn't answer it on the Instagram, but just since you mentioned liking questions.
Okay.
I'm curious what we'll end on this, but I'm curious what your answer is to this, because I've answered this question before in other Q&As on Instagram and stuff. But there's always, you know, the question of specific pests, and that's a very common question. There's also obviously the questions of availability. The thing that this question stood out to me because it says, what is the most difficult plant to propagate or pest-wise in your experience?
Okay, so I guess I would have two different answers for that question, considering it's kind of two different parts.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to throw both pieces in there because
Okay.
those are like the two most common things. It's like, what do you struggle with to grow the most, and or what do you struggle with pests the most?
So I'm going to preface that growing plants, especially I've been here 6 months, it's a learning battle. So my answer now of what maybe is the hardest won't be the same answer if you ask me this next year.
100%, yeah.
But to be honest, I think we have the biggest struggle specifically in just mass producing plants that have really big stems. So I'm thinking like I had a 14-inch philodendron lacerum totem that was like 8 feet tall, that these stems are easily like an inch around. Being able to take those stems and chop them up and get it from that huge giant piece into a size that is feasible to sell to our customers in, you know, a 3-inch or 4-inch size is kind of hard to do. And there's just manipulation that goes into play of taking that cutting and putting it in a 6-inch and letting it sit in a 6-inch and then pup from that 6-inch and then taking those cuttings and then putting it in a smaller pot. And so I think that's the hardest type of plants that we're having to grow right now, is we have a lot of these big mature philodendrons, but taking them from that big mature plant into something that our customer can receive via mail.
I was going to say that can actually go through the mail is the real thing. It's not that we're opposed to growing bigger plants. It's that, you know, there is the cost effectiveness of shipping larger items across the country. The more weight it is, all that stuff adds up. So,
and then I think the second part of the question in regards to pests, right now would be just some Calathea varieties.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. We have, like we said at the beginning of the episode, We battle mites occasionally, and
We
there
battle
are just,
every pest
Right.
occasionally. I mean, that's a grower thing.
And there's in these hot months, there's just like Stromanthe Triostar is just like the hardest thing. They don't like the super hot weather. They attract mites all the time. It's so impossible to get underneath every single side of the leaf on the bench, especially when they're packed really tight on the bench. And so, yeah, I think Calathea right now is just our biggest struggle.
And
pest-wise.
sometimes those pests, just like they would happen for a customer where, you can bring it in from a natural cause of one grabbing onto your clothes. We've gotten a batch of Stromanthe in the past that have come with the problem. So that always is a fun uphill battle and is, hard. But yeah, mites is one of them. The other thing I think, as far as pests goes, kind of going back to the whole noticing it and reporting it is the biggest thing. I think that in the lifespan of Gabriella plants, myself personally, my answer would be we tend to struggle with things that are out of sight. Things, whether they're hanging baskets and they're just up and out of the way a little bit, or when you get to like the bench that has all the pink princess mothers or like all the Syngonium albo mothers and things, you just get so much dense foliage that on a 6 foot wide table, like how much you can physically see the center of the bench.
And then when going to spray, like physically being able to get the spray nozzle and those droplets of the pesticide up into that, densely packed foliage and
Correct.
Efficiently eradicate those pockets of pests that may be in there is difficult. And so then, that adds to the issues.
Yeah, but I definitely say the overgrown. If people say, what do you battle most? I think the pests change based on the season. In the winter months, it's more aphids and, mealy bugs. In the summer months, it's more mites and thrips, like just by what gets active and what is capable of exploding its own population quicker. And aphids and mealy bugs are a little bit easier to treat in general. But it is interesting to see how the battles change, and it is always normally the fault of something that's just enough out of sight or just thick enough that you can't quite see it. And
I don't want to end on that. We are working. We're we're diligently working to get better and better and better. And
well, that's what I'm saying is like honestly we respond to it like a crisis if there's 10 plants on a bench that have mites. So I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. Like oftentimes, we're making a huge deal out of I found 5. There was 150 of these things on the bench, and I only found 5, but I still found 5, and somebody needs to know, and we just want to make sure that we get it. So that being said, though, if you ever have any types of problems with pests or anything, feel free to reach out to us. Photos are always super helpful. And one of the things that we always tell customers, because sometimes photos underneath a leaf can have some soil up underneath there and some other objects that can often look like a pest but not be a pest. So the number one thing to do when you get plants in from any other vendor or from us or anywhere is rinse them off one good time, get them nice and clean, and take a couple photos with your phone. You'll be able to kind of tell, 1, how the plant grows over the next few months, and then 2, if there's any new spot. If you're worried about a spot, even if it's a bacteria thing, take a picture of it. Did it really get bigger overnight or not? That's just such a simple way to know kind of what you're dealing with, and we're always here to resolve things. And
we're planning on we'll do another podcast down the road on pests that we can dedicate the whole hour to.
Well, we were talking about that before this one, and we started like going into like, okay, but we need to make sure that we have this answer and everything. Like, okay, we'll do that next week. So we'll get that put together for you guys, because it is a common question, and something that I've always said on streams, and I'll say it to end this podcast, is that any grower challenge is all part of the process and shouldn't be viewed as a failure. There's no way to avoid having a pest in your collection the same way it's not, it's impossible for us to 100% avoid. So it's more important that you learn the lessons of what to do and how to best go forward from these things, because most of these problems can be resolved.
Yes. And then you have that knowledge in your growing tool belt that, you can just keep learning and know that if something arises, this is what you should do. These are recommendations. These are different ways you can go about it. And it just overall makes us better growers, and it makes the customers better growers.
100%. And for the customers that can learn and ingest and become pros at this, like every plant community in any country, in any city, needs the people who have the experience and they've been through having a problem with that pest or that type of, issue with a plant, and
that
to be
it
able to
is
share
reliable
that resource.
information. And
Correct.
we here at Gabriella Plants are a source for reliable information.
Yeah, because there's plenty of ideas, and just because it worked once for somebody else doesn't always mean it's best practices and
Right.
that kind of thing too. So we'll do our best to keep helping our customers in every way we can. We love getting to do the
yes.
podcast and help people, and I hope you guys enjoy the radical transparency that we've always tried to have with our customers about what it's like to do what we do every week. So with that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. If you guys are going to be in Denver in the week end leading up into the 4th of July, the July 1st, 2nd, or 3rd dates, I'll be doing probably a meetup somewhere out there, so stay tuned to the Gabriella Plants Online Instagram. I'll post maybe a plant shop or something I'll be able to hang out at with a little while and hopefully meet some of you guys. I'll bring some merch and stuff along too. Woo! And Brett, you're going to be holding down the fort at the greenhouse.
Yes.
You got a lot to plant this week, I know.
Absolutely.
Everything's exploding and we're always growing more. So with that, thank you guys for listening to this week's episode. We would love if you would rate and review us on your favorite podcasting app. And with that, we will see you guys next week.
Until next time, guys, keep growing.
Yep, always growing more.